how do you make life-changing decisions? Because to be honest, moving to the UK is a life-changing decision. Because it essentially means you give up everything you've always known and everybody you've always known and your old ways and start on a new journey. So obviously, whichever place you end up in needs to be substantially better than where you were already, or the gamble won't pay off. And it's not just as simple as picking a place on the map and saying, hey, I'm going to move there, or just having one option. In order to make sure you're making the right decision, you need to have multiple options and you need to evaluate them. And that is, to be honest, probably the best way to try and ensure that you're not making a colossal mistake. And I hope that's at least how you guys are doing it. So when we were evaluating where to move, obviously Australia came up as one of the options, which is obvious because of the title of this video. But the reason why we considered Australia was very similar to the reasons why we picked the UK in the first place. It was an English-speaking country, they were welcoming to expats, and a lot more. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the similarities and the differences between life in the UK and life in Australia and seeing how they stack up against each other. If you're new to my channel, my name is Ashika, and on this channel, we talk about moving to the UK, or in this case, whether you should move at all. With that, let's dive in. Let's start off by talking about job opportunities. The median salary for jobs in the UK is £30,720. But of course, remember, it's a median, so your qualifications, job, and the location will determine your actual salary. The salary in London is a lot higher, which is basically £41,866. Now, the only challenge is that the UK is a really expensive place to live. So depending on which city you stay in, these salaries may or may not be enough for you to sustain yourself here. The average salary in Australia, on the other hand, is 90,800 AUD, which is approximately £48,530. Sydney is 96,500 AUD, which is approximately £51,576. And Melbourne is approximately 95,800 AUD, which is approximately £51,200. But when it comes to the UK, the sectors that have the most jobs for expats or immigrants are IT, healthcare, construction, engineering. In Australia, the jobs facing a shortage are in construction, engineering, teaching, healthcare, and IT, so not really that different. So salaries in Australia are a lot higher compared to salaries in the UK, especially for certain sectors, and I've heard this from the horse's mouth, especially for doctors. So if you're looking to make those extra bucks, Australia is a clear winner here. Now, when it comes to education, there is a clear winner here. The UK is home to Oxford, Cambridge, the University of London, London School of Economics, and that's just to name a few, and they are absolutely brilliant institutions. But that's talking about higher education. Let's talk about primary education. Education for primary and secondary schools is free in state schools and is still some of the best education offered in the world. Of course, when you think about higher education, the fees are pretty steep, but then again, they're not very high compared to fees in the US. So that's something you should keep in mind. Australia is very similar in terms of education. It offers free education to children in primary and secondary school, and some of its higher institutions are equally good, especially if you think about the University of Melbourne and Sydney. Now, everything else being the same, the honest fact is that the UK has got 4 institutions ranked in the top 10 of the QS World Rankings, and Australia hasn't gotten any. So I would say that the UK is a winner here. Now, let's talk about the culture of both of these places. When you think of the UK, you think of the monarchy, royalty, palaces, carriages, beautiful gardens, and the King's Guard. It's just synonymous with the UK. It's also very famous for its theatres and museums, but yeah, mostly the palace. Now, when you talk about the people in the UK, it can be a slightly touchy topic, but here's the thing. The people in the UK are extremely polite. Polite to the extent where there are memes on how polite they are. So even if they're really annoyed about something, they'll find a very polite way to let you know. But of course, this is in most cases, and it's mostly with older generations. You mess with the younger generation and you'll get a mouthful of British insults, which you'd rather avoid. But while they're really polite and well-behaved, here's the thing, they aren't very chilled out. Like, for instance, in India, if you know somebody from work or your casual friends, it's very common to invite someone over to your house, but that's not really the case in the UK. They'll be polite, they'll smile, but they're not going to probably invite you to their circle of friends or invite you to their houses or invite you to a drink. It doesn't work that way in the UK. People in the UK love hitting the beach in the summer. It is their absolute favorite thing. They love trekking through national parks and forests, irrespective of the weather. So whether it's raining or snowing or the sun's coming down, they will be trekking throughout the country. young and old, which is the absolute brilliant part. And they'll usually head over to their local pub after that for a drink. Folks in Australia are a lot more laid back if you think about it. They love relaxing, they love unwinding at the beach, and they love having a good time. Now, because Australia has moderate weather through the year, its activities are a little different from what you expect in the UK. Like in the UK, there are all the seasons, so all the activities you do are season based. But in Australia, because all the seasons are pretty similar, you can do the same activities all year round. And the people in Australia are relatively friendly and welcoming of people from outside Australia. Now, again, this is very subjective, but if you are somebody who enjoys the outdoors a lot and wants a laid back life, Australia would be the winner. Now, let's talk about the cost of living in both of these countries. You'll actually be surprised, or maybe not, to find that Sydney is the 10th most expensive city to live in the world, and London is only about the 19th. If you check Numbeo, you'll see the cost of living in Australia is slightly higher than the UK. Let's look at some of the numbers. The consumer prices, including rent, in the UK are 18.8% lower than in Australia. Rent prices in the UK are 20.5% lower than in Australia. Grocery prices in the UK are 32.5% lower than in Australia. The local purchasing power in the UK is 4.7% higher than in Australia, which basically means you get more bang for your buck in the UK. Now, if you compare Sydney to London instead, that's where you'll see some changes. While the consumer prices in London are 1.4% lower than in Sydney without rent, if you take rent into account, rent prices in London are 21.6% higher than in Sydney. The bottom line is that the UK is a much more cost-effective place to live in versus Australia. But of course, if you plan on living in the UK, don't live in London if you want to save some money. Now, let's talk about healthcare for a bit. Healthcare or public healthcare in the UK is provided through the NHS, and while it covers all of your consults and most of your surgeries or any treatments that you need, prescriptions are paid for. Dental, however, is not covered under the NHS. The only challenge is that the NHS is facing huge shortages of staff and underpaid staff, striking staff, all of that. And the bottom line is that the wait times to get to meet a doctor in the UK are absolutely mad at this point. You can opt for private healthcare, but it is rather expensive if your company is not paying for it. In Australia, they have a very similar system called the Medicare, but again, from what I know, the wait times over there are also relatively long, so you're kind of in a similar boat. Now, considering that the NHS does offer more facilities than Medicare, I would say that the UK has a leg up over here. Now, the pretty good thing about living in the UK is that no place is really too far away, except Australia, which of course isn't the case with Australia because only New Zealand is close by, nothing else is close by. When you live in the UK, Paris is 3 hours away by train, Amsterdam is 1 hour by flight, Madrid is 2 hours by flight, Mumbai is 9 hours by flight, New York is 6 hours by flight. But if you think of Australia, Paris to Sydney is 21 hours, Amsterdam is another 21 or 22 hours, New York is 23 hours, everything is far away. But Thailand is 9 hours away, if that helps. No, it doesn't. Now, the only challenge with the UK here is that because the UK is no longer part of the EU, you would need a Schengen visa if you belong to most countries to visit Europe. But it's still manageable compared to the 24 hours and the 21 hours. So I would definitely say that the UK is a winner here. Now, here's the thing. Talking about the weather, how you compare weather can be quite tricky. I actively avoid the sun. I don't like the sun. I don't go out in it. But most of the people in the UK absolutely love the sun. In the UK, you will get all the seasons. It doesn't get too hot in summers, and the summers are not too long. In winters, you'll get a day or two of snow, of course, unless you're in Scotland. And of course, it can rain whenever it wants to in the UK, but the rain is not really a heavy downpour. It's more of a drizzle. Now, while the winters don't get really too cold, especially compared to Europe, they can get cold for people who aren't really fond of the cold in the first place. Like right now, we're shooting in May, and I'm still wearing a jumper because the house gets rather cold. In summer, the weather ranges from 20 to 35 degrees. In winter, it could be anywhere from 4 degrees to -5 degrees. And in spring, it's a nice, comfortable 10 to 20 degrees. In Australia, of course, it's a lot warmer all year round and sunny with an average temperature of 32 degrees all year round. So it honestly depends on what you're looking for, because if you are a person who enjoys the sunny days and enjoys the warmth, I would say Australia is the place for you. If you are someone who's looking for all the seasons and does enjoy the cold quite a bit, I would say the UK is for you. Don't get dissuaded by what people say that it's raining all the time. It's really not raining all the time. We've barely seen any rain in the past 2 years, which might mean a different sort of problem. But even if it does rain, it rains, it's light rain, you can still go out and it passes in just like an hour or two. And just because of that, I would say Australia is slightly better in this regard. Now, transport in the UK is a little like healthcare. It's great till it isn't. London is really well connected by itself. They've got the tube, they've got the train, they've got buses, they've got trams, they've got bikes, and all of them have a really high frequency. But if you want to go somewhere from London to another town, you'll get to the town centre by a bus or a train. And then, if you're lucky, there'll be a connecting bus, or you're on your own. You either walk or you take a cab. And cabs can get quite expensive in the UK. The cost of a monthly ticket for public transport in London is £151, and the minimum fare for taxis is £3.2. 1 mile will cost you anywhere from £6 to £10. Now, Australia is pretty similar because obviously they have big cities and big cities are really well connected. But of course, if you wanted to go anywhere else remote, you would need your own vehicle because again, like the UK, public transport can be far and few in between. The price of a monthly ticket for public transport in Australia is 191 Australian dollars, which is approximately £102. The base fare for taxis is 5.4 Australian dollars, which is approximately £2.89. And the rate per kilometre is 3.28 Australian dollars, which is approximately £1.75. Now, honestly, transport is just more affordable in Australia, so Australia is a clear winner. Now, let's talk about safety. I will say this, that people's perception of safety always changes depending on where they're coming from. If you're coming from a country that is extremely safe, every other country would pale in comparison, and vice versa. In terms of safety, both countries rank similarly, and it's actually safe to walk during the daytime and at night. That being said, this is an average, so something you do need to remember is that both of these countries will have pockets or areas that are relatively unsafe compared to other areas. Like in London, there are parts of London in which you can get mugged at night, you have pickpockets, or your car can get broken into. But then there are also a lot of areas where you can walk safely at night at any time of the night and not have to worry about anything. I mean, the fact that most of the houses in the UK have doors that are made of glass is an indicator that it's actually a safe place. Now, in Australia, you have different threats which are more or less natural threats compared to man-made threats. It's very common in Australia to find spiders in your house, and you get, of course, the occasional poisonous jellyfish or snakes. And of course, there are riptides that can pull you in at times and extremely dangerous UV rays. But then again, I would say that except for mosquitoes and spiders, everything else would be as common as a mugging in the UK, which is really not that common. So I would say it's a tie. Now, another very hot favorite amongst people who are looking to move out of their countries in search of a better life is Canada. And if you are looking for a comparison to see how Canada stacks up against the UK, I would definitely recommend you watch this.